Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who is listening in to Future Strong on a Friday. My name is Nikki Garchea. I'm the co-founder of Capfinity, an assessment and development business. As always, joined by the lovely Lindsay Pollock and the long-awaited guest that is Dawn Carter. We're very excited.
Thank you
So
both.
excited I changed my top to just make sure that I could give homage to Dawn. Lindsay, introduce yourself to everyone and then we'll hand over to Dawn.
Thank you, Nikki. I'm so delighted to be here with everyone. As always, audience, please say hello and introduce yourselves and tell us where you are watching from. We've already got our good friend, Fred Burke. Welcome. My name is Lindsay Pollock. I am an author and speaker and a very proud ambassador for Capfinity. I'm the author of 4 books. My latest is Recalculating, Navigate Your Career Through the Changing World of Work. And I today am a FODC, friend of Dawn Carter, who is a frequent audience member and very vocal when she is in the audience, has very graciously woken up very early in the morning in California for us. So Nikki and I are just delighted to welcome our friend Dawn Carter.
Well, thank you both. And Fred Burke, I believe it's your birthday today, so happy birthday.
Fred Burke, happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Fred Burke.
Happy belated birthday. Just an FYI, I'm a little behind on birthdays. Hi, everyone. I'm Dawn Carter, and I am the Director of Global University Programs at Uber. And I also am the Director for our Talent Coordination Organization. Super excited to be here. We've been talking about doing this, and so excited that we could get it on the calendar, even though it is zero dark early a little bit, but 7 a.m. on a Friday is fabulous.
Dawn, you have many roles that we want to talk about in recruiting, but first we wanted to mention that you are a past president of NACE, the National Association of Colleges and Employers. Nikki and I are proud and active members, and the NACE conference is coming up in June in Portland. Can you, let's call it a commercial. Can you just give us a little commercial for the NACE conference and talk a little bit about your role as president? I'd love to hear about that experience too.
You know, being president, one of the best honors you have is your conference. And Dave Ong is our current president, and so excited that we're doing an in-person conference. The year I was president, I was super lucky. It was our 60th NACE anniversary. So we had a few extra special bells and whistles during that day and during that week. So it was lots of fun. This year, I'm actually on 2 panels. I'm on a panel with Mary and Sean from the NACE organization regarding the advocacy work. I chair our advocacy committee. It's a 4-year commitment, 2 years as co-chair, so you can learn everything around advocacy. And I'm in my 3rd year, so I have 1 more year. And then Norma will be taking over for me. I'm very excited for that. And then I'm also on a panel with 3 amazing women from the Bay Area, just talking about being women in our era and what's going on. And so we're very excited about that too. So I hope everyone is registered, get your walking shoes on. Portland is an amazing city, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. Please let us know, audience members in the chat, if you are attending the NACE conference. We want to welcome Anna, who is watching from London. We've got our good friend and colleague Trudy Steinfeld. Oh, wonderful, is in West Virginia today with Kathy Sims. Hi to Kathy and Manny. We've got Honey from Nottingham in the UK, and Ralph, welcome from the West Coast, where you are also up early with Dawn Carter. So thank you so much for that. Dawn, we want to dive in, and we've already talked a little bit about you being based in Silicon Valley, and we want to talk a lot about that because it's so different from so many other regions. Can you just tell us a little bit about your career path? What attracted you to recruiting in the first place? And tell us a little bit about how you got to Uber.
You know, for me, I didn't start in recruiting or talent acquisition at all. I actually have a degree in hotel, restaurant, culinary management. Like every good college student, went to the Career Center, took the assessments of what you want to be, and it said 2 things: hospitality or teaching. My sister is an amazing teacher, and we're a little competitive. At least we were at that age. And I was like, oh, I do not want to follow her. But my sister couldn't cook at the time. She was awful. In fact, when she cooked, we really didn't eat all her food very well. So I did the one thing I naturally did well, even young, was cooking. And that's how I ended up. So I was in the hospitality industry for my first career out of college, and then kind of had a meltdown and was like, I don't really want to do this anymore. And had a great, mentor from college. And he's like, everything you like to do is HR. And so I kind of just went sideways and got in at Disney within HR and kind of worked my way up from the bottom and naturally ended up in talent acquisition, did lots of stints in other areas, and then kind of ended up in university programs right away in my career. And so it's just been there 20 years later. My dad actually was just one of those people, worked at the same company 42 years. He told me, don't work at the same company that many years. Learn industries. You can always take your career. And I think I naturally felt most comfortable around engineers. And so, I've worked at Disney, and that's a unique set of engineering. And then I worked, at Northrop Grumman, and that's a kind of a unique set of engineers. But then went to Amazon, and I'm like, oh, I like these guys and gals really well. And so naturally just felt comfortable in the way they do business and the way they work. 2011 moved back to the Silicon Valley, and have just loved it ever since. And it is a unique bird. It's very different cultures. Some people love it, some people don't. And I don't, it's not for everyone, right, to go work for a FANG or a FANG Plus type of company. But for me, it's just where I feel I can be myself and where I feel I do my best work.
Thanks, Dawn. It's amazing to hear some of your career as well. We'll probably ask you much more about that as we go through. But as you talk about Silicon Valley, there are probably much has been written about the Silicon Valley tech firms return to the office, not return to the office, hybrid working. When Lindsay and I had the privilege to speak to you off the record about some of the things that we're capturing for our NACE presentation, our research, you just shared some highlights that we found hugely innovative. But would you share some of the things that you've seen Uber do, but maybe there's other companies that you're seeing in the Valley area kind of just do different things to navigate these times?
Yeah, it's super interesting in the Bay Area, and I think every company needs to solve for themselves. And I think for Uber, we knew that there's a factor of the work that we do that needs to be in person, but really went about it in a way that allows huge flexibility for our teams and our employees. One of the coolest things we did is we have these new roles in our buildings called hosts. And I was intrigued. First of all, I voluntarily got to go into the office, and I kind of went back into the office because I was tired of cooking for myself. And we have the most amazing cafeterias with the best pizza ovens you can imagine. And so I was like, okay, I'll go into the office, start testing it out. And I started to meet these folks, and I was like, who are you, like sitting near me? And I was so intrigued by their enthusiasm and what they do. And I'm like, what role do you have at Uber? I've never met you. And part of me was like, I want to recruit them for my teams because I was just so impressed with their customer service and helpful and how they were working. And they're like, we're hosts. And I'm like, what are hosts? And really the hosts in our buildings are there for our employees. Not only do they just help employees, but they engage with them. They create events for our employees. They really want to figure out a way so when you are in the office, you can do your best work. This last week, we had Cinco de Mayo events. We had May the 4th Be With You events. They're all dressed up in their best Star Wars t-shirt, right?
This is so Silicon Valley.
I know, but you know what? It's so funny that you're like, oh, I can go watch a movie at work, right? And that's what I, went into work. A, for the pizza because they had truffle pizza that day, and 2, I could watch one of the Star Wars movies. So I think for us, we're really trying our facilities and their amazing teams really are trying to look at how do we provide the best experience. And they give tours to our employees. And so it is something new we're trying. And I appreciate that we're trying doing something different. And I also think we're unprescripted. You don't have to be in certain days. And I think that's where you see some of the Silicon Valley, chatter on Blind or other rhetoric, because there's some companies that are trying to be like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And we're like, no, it's really up to you. For my team, I'm like, look at day in the office is if you're on a plane, that's a day in the office. If you're on campus, that's a day in the office. I want my team to be able to balance their work and their life. And we also have the ability to work fully remote. So anyone that has requested to work fully remote on my team has been 100% approved because I want people to feel like it's the best time for them.
Dawn, what are you hearing from students? I'm getting a lot of conflicting information where students certainly want flexibility, but work is also a place where you meet people, right?
Yeah.
And you know, the idea of everyone being home all the time, I think can be very isolating. What do you think? And certainly every student is different, but I'd really love to hear what the students are saying about where they want to be. And I could also see a student who really wants to be in office, but doesn't want to be the only one there. So tell us a little bit about what you're hearing.
You know, when we started this year out, we made the shift to go back in person for our intern program. So in APAC and NAMER, we're the last. So Latin America and EMEA have had interns in office. I think what's interesting is we gave students a choice of either being fully remote or coming in and hybrid like the rest of us. And at first it was like 75% were coming in and 25% weren't. And then once LinkedIn, we have a LinkedIn chat channel. Once they started talking about, oh, free food, free this, we're all going to be here. We probably ended up with around 15% of our employees, interns being fully remote. So we'll find out next week. It's our first intern class in the US, but our intern classes in India, they're thriving. They bring an energy to the building that hasn't been there. They bring energy to teams. And so I think overall students are nervous, like first time they've ever worked in an office. We've actually met with our hosts, our cafeterias, all of those dependent teams where we're like, look at they eat a lot of food, so please don't run out of pizza. Most likely they'll be there Tuesday. We encourage them not to go to the office on the first day because, you know, our new hire orientation is virtual, but I'm like, they're going to come in. So we're really kind of sat down to try and create the best experience. But overall, I think students are nervous. I think they're nervous because, you know, their campus may have been really different. Their campus could have been a hybrid. Their campus could have been fully in person. And I think they're nervous to do the right thing. What I've told my team is, look, we have planned for this, but stuff's going to happen and we'll figure it out. And they're smart students. And so we're excited to hear what they say and understand what they want. And I honestly believe as organizations, we have this really unique opportunity to start over as companies and create experiences that students want. And I think it's going to be maybe totally different than we've done 4 years ago or 2 years ago. And I think it gives us opportunities as companies to really experiment and try and figure out what students want. I think students are used to some things being virtual, but I think we will always have a virtual aspect to it. But I also think it's taught us that students have access to us in a different way than they did 4 years ago, 3 years ago. So I think they're nervous, but I think overall they're excited to be back in the office.
It's so student and employee led. It's incredible to hear the things that you're doing. In terms of, and I feel bad because you're so positive, but in terms of the things that sometimes keep you today, even in the morning.
Yes.
What are some of the things that, and over, you know, recent months, there's been many things to kind of keep us all awake at night. But when you think about your challenges at Uber right now, what are some of the things that you're focused on that are maybe harder to solve than the fabulous food and the hosts and those things, which are incredible?
I think it's really, and I think this will be interesting this summer, is that our interns have full access to all of the benefits I do as an employee. And I think some of those wellness, mental health might be easier to do virtually. And so wanting to make sure they still lean into that. We do see that students have high stresses in their lives. both in school, outside of school. And so I think it's finding the right balance for them that keeps me up at night, making sure that they kind of feel 100% comfortable that they can raise their hand or ask their talent advisor to find those things for them. I think what keeps me up at night too is my own team, right? I have an amazing global team. 60% of them are brand new to Uber in the last year. That great resignation happened, but what the great resignation happened, it also brought us probably one of our most globally diverse teams we've ever been able to hire. I worry about them and making sure that they don't try and do too much, that they're balancing work and still finding time for life. They're very amazing and they'll go and they'll go. And I want them to make sure that they take time for themselves because I am not always great at that myself sometimes. And so wanting to make sure they find that balance for that. But I do think, probably other things that keep me up at night are things that are not inherent to Uber. Enrollment is still down in this country in the United States. Trying to find women engineers in countries that only produce 15 to 16% women. And those are things that keep me up at night, more of just how do we solve those problems? But those are long-term problems for us at Uber, right? Making sure we have the most diverse workforce, making sure we have future pipeline globally for students. So I think overall it's kind of twofold. My team, I know they're going to hit their goals. They do every year. In fact, they overhit this year in many areas. And so I think it's just finding the right balance when you go back to in person, because I think it drains you sometimes.
For sure. I think we could all use some ideas on that. Don, you brought up diversity in a variety of ways, global, gender, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit about how Uber is approaching diversity? And it's sort of, I think, traditionally always been a particular challenge for the tech industry. So I'd love to hear, why that is. Obviously, the number of engineers and diversity of engineers is part of it. But how is Uber approaching that? And I really love the global perspective on that as well.
One of the things we've done is really take our best programs and start to globalize them. So we have a program that started out of India. It's called She++. And it's a 2-day event where we bring second-year students. And thinking about future pipeline is not something like early adapter programs is not something you see a lot in India. And so for us, the program has allowed us to hire our Uber Star class, which is our sophomore program for women and underserved students. And it also has allowed us to take our programs for women in engineering from 19% women to 47% women in our intern class in 3 years. So for us, it's finding the right mix of those programs. So this year we're taking She++ Global. We'll be launching it in EMEA and in the US. And I love that not everything doesn't start in the US or at corporate, as we call it. I think the Silicon Valley has a bad rap because it's a little bro-ish sometimes when you look at VC funding, when you look at who's at the top of echelon in some of these companies. Some companies have done really well, but I think some of the early startups, it is still predominantly men-driven startups. And so I think for students, it's trying to find and navigate that. I think if you're students who have different cultural backgrounds, we may not have those in the Silicon Valley, right? You may not find that church or that barber that is easy to find in another city. And so we find parents, typically parents sometimes of Black students, not always want their kid to come to the Silicon Valley to do their internship. So I think what you have seen is the Silicon Valley start to build talent hubs in other cities. Amazon's in Virginia, right? You have Google and, Meta and other cities, whether that's Atlanta or Austin and even the South. And at Uber, we're going to be opening a tech center in Miami, right? We're really trying to be thoughtful where we continue to open technical hubs so that students don't feel like they have to always come to the Silicon Valley to still get Uber or to still get that Silicon Valley-ness of what it's about. So yeah, for us, it's around taking proven programs, starting new ones, This year, we also had our first senior PM of global diversity and recruiting on my team. And Tommy's amazing and has really started to drive what that looks like. So,
Dawn, I'm interested to hear some of the things that you might be doing either with younger individuals to interest them in technology. And I also seem to think you were doing something interesting with drivers who could educate themselves. I just love collecting these range of stories. So will you share for everyone just some of the different things that are happening from a, I guess, talent broadening space?
Yeah, I think for Uber, it's how do we do, I think that's a great way to say it, talent broadening. One is our earners and our drivers are the backbone of who we are at Uber. And so we have a couple of number of programs. One is called, it's our Diamond Education Program. So if you're a Diamond driver with Uber and you have so many rides and you've been with the company so long, you actually can get a degree at the Arizona State University online for free. You pick your major. Last year, I think we had 75 of our earners and drivers graduate with degrees. The cool thing about that program too is if you don't want to use it, but you want your spouse or your kids to use it, you can pass that on to them. And we really think about just passing education on to the next generation. We also have a partner with an organization in New York City called Pursuit. And we have built a program out where they take earners and drivers and teach them to be software developers. And this year we evolved that program where Pursuit does the recruiting for us and does some of the work. And then they actually come on board as an apprentice within Uber. And so we have our first boost class that is going to be graduating in a couple months. And I think that for Uber is where we find opportunities. Sales Academy is another one where our earners and drivers, and also where our, what we call them S-ladder employees at Uber, they may be in our customer care centers. We actually have opportunities where they can join these sales academies or boost engineering programs. Because really making sure that they have opportunities too is something that has always been really important at Uber. So I think we try and think about it holistically and really maybe start with a partnership and then build it ourselves. And I think that gives us the best opportunity to build the right program and structure.
I love all of that. It's so unique. And it strikes me, I'm so interested in generations. I think if you ask people to name companies that are emblematic of certain generations, I think Uber would be like top of most people's list for millennials and Gen Z. And in fact, fewer kids get their driver's license now as teenagers, partly because of Uber, which is sort of an astonishing fact. Can you talk a little bit, because you've been doing this a long time, particularly in Silicon Valley. And I remember I graduated in the 90s when going to Silicon Valley was still very progressive. What do you see as the differences with this Gen Z? Obviously, Capfinity works very closely with Gen Z, and you talked about some of the challenges of enrollment being down. Are you seeing young people, particularly since the pandemic, which is going to be, I think, one of the defining factors of Gen Z, how are they different? What kinds of different questions are they asking? Do you see a big change, or does it feel like students are just students? I would just love your perspective on the generational question.
I love this generation. I think too, I've heard that, again, these are mostly kids of Gen X, and I'm a Gen Xer. That's probably why I get along with Gen Z students so well. I'm sure if I had kids, these would be my kids, right? I actually think they're changing the workforce and the workplace very similar to millennials. Millennials were what they wanted in the workplace. And I think what we're seeing out of Gen Z is how they want to work. And that may be really different than millennials, right? The how could be hybrid. The how could be, I don't have to be in the office every day. The how could be that I will stay longer at your company if you allow movement, right? They're more, I see early on that they're more aligned to kind of shifting within a company versus shifting companies. And I think that's what you see a lot in Silicon Valley is 2 years here, 2 years there, 2 years over there. And that's some of the work we're even doing at Uber. We started gigs, so employees, including our insurance, can do gigs. So a certain percentage of the time they can go off and do a gig. because our thought is that they really want to learn and do different things, right? Even within our engineering focused areas, our entry level point, they can laterally move different teams. And again, we look at that more as that jungle gym versus like the stepping box. So we see at Uber that when you look at attrition rate, our attrition rate, is a certain level. Folks that interned with us actually is the lowest attrition. So if they interned and then came back as a new college grad, and then right above that are new college grad direct hires. So we're finding that as long as that ecosystem is created for them, they're staying longer than normal, regular kind of industry hires off the street. So I love the fresh air they bring into it, the push on our leaders to think differently and be better managers. And I think they want transparent conversations. I don't think that's any different than any generation, but I definitely think the conversations tie more to work, that it's more than just work. So they want to know how can I be a better XYZ person and still do my side gig on the side.
You're making me think, Dawn, with all the things that you're mentioning that Uber's doing, particularly for the Gen Z talent. What are some of the skills that Uber's looking for in that generation? And maybe these are things that you don't necessarily get taught at college, but what are some of those kind of future skills that you're really interested in?
That's a great question. When I look at our students, I see students that, not only can code, but students that may have come from family-owned businesses do really well because we work with small restaurants or we work with the CVSs of life. But I think that really that entrepreneurial spirit does really well. And we're a very fast-paced organization like everyone else. And you have to be able to kind of work in that and thrive in that. But I think they bring entrepreneurial spirit, and we look at it really differently. It's not just about school, but it's projects. Maybe it's church. Maybe it's something you've done outside of work. And I think finding those generational folks that have that full spectrum of work and outside life do really well at Uber. Smart, just like every other company, right? We look for people that are smart, entrepreneurial, scrappy. We're still, 12 years in, 13 years in, I think it is now. We're still a very scrappy company, right? And very agile. And so I think students that can thrive in those areas do really well. But I also think students that are going to push and really drive to ask for change and buck the system and really push us to think differently and have confidence in that and have confidence in the work they're doing.
You have the loveliest use of language. I'm going to rename a strength. We need to have the scrappy strength. It'll be the DC scrappy strength. It's brilliant.
I love scrappies. I think probably, again, I go back to, I was brought up by a dad who, philosophy was he was very MacGyver-ish, right? Taught my sister and I how to be MacGyver girls, right? You can do a lot with duct tape and you can do a lot with like WD-40, right? And so my sister and I are just super scrappy. And I also think it's maybe first generational for me and my sister going to college, right? And so, my whole life I've had to be that way. And I don't think that's changing in our work environment.
No, and I think it's probably a differentiator right now as well. And a generation that have had to be very scrappy with what they've experienced. Well, I'll move from the duct tape because there's something perhaps we could bring into our NACE presentation, Lindsay, and get you to give us, I don't know how you summarize. I ask you for 3, you normally go for 4, but what have you got today? 28.
I have a lot. I have a lot today. Yes, that's why my head was down for half of the presentation. Thank you to Dawn Carter of Uber for being our guest on episode 36 of Future Strong. We're firmly in middle age. Here's what I learned today from Dawn Carter. Number 1, that it is Fred Burke's birthday. So happy birthday to our dear friend, former guest on Future Strong and frequent audience member, Fred, who is such a good friend to all of us. We learned a new job title tied to return to office, which is the idea of hosts, which reminds me very much of being an RA in college. So I feel like there is now finally a professional job of being an RA. Uber calls them hosts, and they are on site in the offices creating events and experiences. And I think really making the office a welcoming place to be. And I think that that is a really progressive idea that a lot of us probably perked up about. Second takeaway that John shared, which I think needs to be said and isn't enough, which is that not every program, particularly related to diversity, equity, inclusion, has to start in the United States. Sounds like Uber has learned a lot from programs in India and elsewhere, particularly attracting women and other people from underrepresented groups to technology, early ID programs, and really thinking creatively about how to attract new people early on in the process. We talk about that a lot, but not from the global perspective. And then a term that I think Nikki coined today and Dawn is going to use, the idea of talent broadening. All of us are familiar with Uber drivers and earners, and there are so many amazing programs you have to provide education to drivers and their families, to provide sales programs. You mentioned a sales academy, and also the idea of turning drivers into software engineers. And you really tied that to the idea that Generation Z are very interested in internal mobility, that sometimes you can change jobs and careers and have an entirely new path within a company. So I think one of the solutions to the Great Resignation that you're offering, and I totally agree with, is the idea that you don't have to leave a company to recalculate or reshuffle your career. We also want to, again, give a shout out to NACE and the upcoming NACE conference in beautiful Portland, Oregon. I want to end with a chance for you to talk about your programs again, but Nikki and I are presenting on Wednesday, June 8th at 4:15 p.m. We are a little nervous about being that late in the afternoon, so I'm going to personally offer to buy a cocktail to anyone who comes and stays, and we'll take you out for drinks after. A caffeinated cocktail to be there after the program, not before. Thank you, Dawn Carter of Uber.
Thank you very much.
We'll give you the last word. How can people get in touch with you, and any final thoughts?
You know, I'm on LinkedIn, so Dawn Carter, or if you want to email me at dcarter@uber.com. More than happy to share anything, and also love to learn if you're doing things that we can learn from. I always think that's super important. You know, I think this is just an opportune time in the university world. We have students back in the office, and I kind of tell my team this, our, mantra really is, it doesn't have to always be the same. And I think it's our opportunity to really shift and change how we recruit the generational talent that's in the ecosystem. So I look forward to seeing everyone at NACE. Looking forward to seeing you, my two friends. So excited. And so just really happy to finally have an opportunity to be on one of your, Future Strong episodes. So I always look forward to them.
Thank you so much, Dawn. And we can't wait to see you in person. There's a few people joining NACE virtually, so we look forward to seeing them as well. And in 2 weeks' time, we have also a wonderful friend of the NACE community, Mary Scott, who will be sharing some of the highlights of her latest research. So another wonderful guest. And we wish everybody safe weekends. We look forward to seeing you 2 weeks from now. And thank you again, Dawn Carter, for an absolutely brilliant episode.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.